great things about my job here at Apex is that I get to work with Todd Rokita, which means that whenever I have a question about legislation or policy or anything that's going on in Congress, I get to ask him whether he likes it or not. And so as we adjust to our new environment and as businesses acclimatize to this pandemic world, I'm wondering if we're going to see paid leave come down the federal pipeline for legislation. And so I was going to ask Todd about this yesterday, and then I thought, I think we're all tired of the news, so I thought I'd invite all of you in to hear our conversation. So Todd, what do you think about paid leave in federal legislation? Do you think it's coming in this new world?
Well, hey, Boooke, it's good to be with you. It's very interesting, right? Because back when the economy was different, which is to say a month ago, actually earlier than that, Congress did in the spending bill that they recently passed require, that is mandate, paid leave for the federal workforce, or a lot of them. So this was really the first foray into Congress mandating, weighing in on the issue, but mandating it for a certain workforce, albeit, and it's because it's about as far as they could go, their own workforce. That is the federal bureaucracy. But it was there, it is there, and now in the virus scenario that we find ourselves, you saw emergency paid sick leave be issued. You saw emergency family leave be issued. That's paid as well. So I think there's a difference that I'm sure you'll bring up too, Boooke. I mean, one, the last example, the example we're in now, the emergency paid sick leave, is for liquidity in the economy. Right, the government literally shut down the economy, and speaking to a lot of congressmen still, and not being so removed from that scene, that I know how it feels to take votes like that. There was a real need and emergency just to get some gears of the economy, keep them oiled, let's say, at least, so that when we start back up, we can start back up. The oil of an economy is money, and so that's why it was done. That's why we have emergency paid sick leave and the emergency FMLA, in this COVID-19 scenario. That's different than the policy perspective of the spending bill from last summer or fall, when they mandated it for the federal workforce.
Do you think, though, that the public is going to get used to this idea of paid sick leave, especially in this new environment where illness could actually halt an economy, and so encouraging people to stay home when they're sick, some would argue it's a good thing, but do you think that workers are going to get used to that, or folks are going to get used to that, and they're going to put public pressure on Congress, and it's going to increase?
Well, they may, and I don't say that in a proud sense. I mean, there is dignity in work. Humans need to work. It's part of our nature, and so the idea that you would get paid to not work, in a way, is an anathema to our very nature, and it reduces our ability to work hard, to produce, to have that best economy in the world. Now, whether it's needed for emergency situations or something like that, I think and where it has been, Boooke, it's been a decision of the free market. It's been an issue of supply and demand. Demand being workers, the supply being less of them. And so really, these paid sick leave policies have been to date, even in the federal bureaucracy example I gave from last summer, I think have been the products of a good economy. Unemployment's low, workers are needed. How do we attract the best talent in that environment? Well, it's through perks. It's through the benefits. And to the extent to the extent paid sick leave or paid family leave is a benefit that rests in the decision-making authority of the private sector in a company to determine if they need to use it or not. Again, that's what I call the free market, free enterprise. They have the choice rather than a mandate from the government to do it. So be it. Let the free market work. Let supply and demand work. That's a different scenario than a federal law being mandated to offer it.
I don't know. I think that we're in one of those, I think they call them election years. I think.
Are you Boooke? Hold on. Are you registered to vote?
Obviously. Have you met me? I'm obviously registered to vote. I'm a proud voter.
Not sure I want that.
I do think that election years can turn things kind of topsy-turvy. And so do you think that that's going to impact the likelihood of introduction into more of a permanent sick leave situation from the federal level?
Well, I'll tell you this. I just last night, and let's see, it's April 16th now. So number one, everything's moving very quickly. Everything's changing. You know, in our rapid response videos that we've done together at apexbg.com, we reference that often, and you can see the progression just from day to day on the tapes or the videos that we produced. Number one. Number two, just virtually being with some congressmen last night for what we call our virtual poker game, where we do more talking than anything.
Imagine.
Yeah, it's what they feel, and what's probably obvious to everybody is that, look, at midnight last night, the PPP program, the Paycheck Protection Program that we've talked about, is running out of money. So they've already burned through that, and it's a popular program. It seems, for the folks that have gotten it and are getting it, that it's been helpful. And that is going to be in the forefront of everyone's mind, how to make sure, again, to get that liquidity, that oil back into the gears of the economy as we start back up. And we see us getting ready to start back up. And all that pent-up demand is going to be released, and so on and so forth. But there's still a lot of hurt and a lot of suffering and a lot of layoffs, and the $600 per week bump up and for 13 weeks of the unemployment insurance, all that's going to cost money. All that's what these programs are starting to run out. So in the mind of a congressperson, that is first and foremost. Probably not a longer-term paid leave policy to foist on the entire nation, because when it's done that way, like I just described, when it's done as a mandate, that's a tax. You can argue the good or bad of the tax, but it is a tax and therefore a burden on the employer. And I think that's the last thing anybody, in election year or not, in this environment, is going to want to do to a business.
That's interesting. I think, but I don't know, if I go back to if the constituency is really demanding it and it's something that they've gotten used to, do you think some of that will bend?
Again, I think it depends on the environment. In a good economy, maybe. This is not that. Yeah. Hopefully we bounce back. Hopefully it's a V. Maybe it's a U. But hopefully we bounce back. I think what workers want now is a job.
I would have predicted earlier that we would have seen it, minus if the pandemic hadn't have happened. But now I don't think it's first and foremost.
Yeah, but it's out there, and the seeds, if you will, have been planted. It'll be interesting to see if Congress comes back to it for the workforce generally. Again, for example, as an employer myself, when I was in public office, I actually offered paid family leave to an employer or two. It was two women who had pregnancies and beautiful babies as a result. But it was something completely anathema to what was done at the time. This was 2 or 3 years ago now, maybe 4 or 5. And they came to me and said, "Hey, I really need this." And we checked the law to make sure I could do that with taxpayer dollars. And it was modest, and it was for 4 or 8 weeks, I forget now. But it was very helpful, and helped me keep 2 very talented, smart women on my staff so that we could do the work of the people. And it's something I don't regret at all, but it was my choice. And I think at the end of the day, if we're going to have policies like this, let it be a voluntary one. Let it, and again, regardless of my personal opinion, that's what's going to go through the mind of every congressperson. Whether this should be voluntary, whether this should be mandated and foisted, what is the cost of all that? That goes through everyone's mind in some form or fashion as they're taking a vote. For some philosophies and ideologies, it may be a brief second that it's in their mind. For other philosophies and ideologies, it weighs very heavily. And again, I think on everyone's mind, well, I can't say everyone's mind. First of all, I'm not an absolutist. And second of all, just by watching our TV throughout the day, it's not in everyone's mind. Some are still foisting ideologies, but on most congresspersons' minds these days, including the executives in the administration, are getting liquidity in the economy and getting people back to work.
No, I agree. And I think especially as you see paid parental leave and you see paid family leave on the increase. So in preparing for our conversation, I took a look at Apex's benchmarking study from 2019, and I was surprised, as I always am, to see that of the folks surveyed, of the businesses surveyed, 29% in Indiana offered paid parental leave, which is against 52% in the nation, but every year it's incrementally pushing upwards. So I think, especially given the current situation we're in now, but if businesses keep responding, as you said, to the market to attract, develop, and retain those employees, you're just going to see that rise. So I don't know if that legislation will have as much public pressure if 52% of folks are getting it across the country.
Right. Yeah, I think the Apex benchmarking survey, which I find it instructive, number one, but I also find it unique in the Indiana and Midwest marketplace. We go out of our way to get that data, not just from our clients, but even from others who aren't our clients, to have a better representational model of what's going on in our state and around us. And that's because the national data houses really, Boooke, as you know, just kind of lump the Midwest together. And when they do that, and you rely as a business or a public policy leader on that kind of data, you really miss the nuances that are Indiana. For example, our very high-priced and overpriced hospital system, based on the fact that we only have 4 major ones and relatively few choices, drives up costs. On the other side of that, Indiana is one of the foremost leaders in the use of HSAs, health savings accounts, which allows consumers to have more control and command of their own spend in terms of healthcare. So that brings down costs, and we're really nuanced strongly in that. So the Apex benchmark survey, if nothing else, gives you a better picture of Indiana. So it's very instructive to see in terms of paid leave and paid family medical leave, that nearly, I think what you said, Boooke, 30%, 29%, something like that, are using, again, to my point, in a voluntary way, these paid options. Now, the last, which was coming into 2019, again, a very good economy. It'll be interesting to see, at our next survey interval, what that looks like. But yeah, it's to your point, Boooke. The trend is to use it, and even guys like me were using it 4 or 5 years ago when the case demanded it.
Well, to your point, it just seems practical to retain that top talent that you need. Well, I really appreciate your time, Todd. I really appreciate you being honest with me and giving me the insight of your colleagues in Congress. So I just want to say thank you.
Oh, thank you, Boooke. I think I appreciate the question. I think you're right on and cutting edge for Apex. So thank you very much.